Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly. And voila, you get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky, along with my friend and co-host, Dwight Brown. Hey, Dwight, how are you?
I'm good, David. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Good.
Today we have with us a special guest, Sophie Wyne from Ariglad, CEO and founder. Sophie, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Why don't you give us a little bit of background as to who you are and what is Ariglad?
Yeah, so I started Ariglad a few years ago, really just wanting to support HR teams and internal ops teams in general. And what we basically do is we triage communication from Teams, Slack, email, and we get to the right person. Just make sure that communication is really streamlined internally.
Well, we love Teams. We love chatting through Teams. Sometimes we don't optimize our use of Teams, I imagine, but we're going to find out a little bit about what your thoughts are on the HR world in a little bit. But one fun thing that no one knows about Sophie is...
So when I was younger, my favorite animal was sea lions, and my first email address was ilovesealions@hotmail.com.
Fascinating.
Nice.
Very
I like
fascinating.
it. I like it.
Because no one knows the difference between a sea lion and a seal, so...
Well, a 9-year-old Sophie did. She was...
But the adult Sophie still does, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say so.
All right. Well, I don't.
Yeah, I don't either. I'd probably mistake it with
David.
a penguin or something like that.
They're a lot bigger. Sea lions are no joke. You do not want to run into a sea lion. Seals are very cute. Sea lions are, like, ferocious. Like,
Are they really?
Yes.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Thus the name lion in sea lion.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yes.
Huh.
So today we're going to talk about how to do more with less in HR. I can't think of a more timely topic in the world of 2023, where HR departments are stretching their budgets and tightening their belts and all of those cliches about how to do more with less. So that'll be a really fun conversation today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So, Sophie, what are some things you've seen that HR departments do to kind of deal? How do they work with less?
I don't know about you, but I don't know very many people that are hopeful about the world of work. And I'd like to change that. My name's Marcus Mossberger, and I started the Hope at Work podcast, where you'll find two things. Number one, really interesting guests. And number two, innovative ideas about the future of work. Check it out.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen this really creatively done in a few different ways. I think one of the ways that we've seen HR really rise to the occasion is just connecting directly with employees in really kind of sympathetic and empathetic ways. I think we've gone through this period of technology where technology was being used for emotional support, for kind of bringing up, kudos software or connecting with employees and celebrating them. And I think this is a moment where, if you're in an industry where there are layoffs, or if your company has had layoffs, or, generally in the economy, there's just this talk of layoffs and employees are getting stressed. And I think we've really seen our, HR teams in our customers or in our network really just connecting with employees again and really building that connection and trust. And I think we have seen HR teams also just take stock of the current technology they're using, making sure that, they're spending where they really need to support their employees really effectively. And yeah, just kind of making sure that employees are taken care of.
So we've seen things like employee self-service, where HR systems, HRITs have made it easier for organizations to get the employee to fill out online forms rather than having to call HR. We've seen BRGs kind of take some of the load off of HR by creating a more empathetic environment and be able to get people to get together and encourage people to get together on company time even to solve for maybe some more mental health issues or support issues. So when you talk about kind of connecting, you're not talking about walking down the hallway and shaking hands, obviously, with a hybrid workforce, mostly in remote workers. You're talking about reaching out and actually, whether it's communicating through Teams or Slack or other ways, like really making those connections, correct?
Really making those connections. And I think to your point, having a mixture of, direct communication with employees and being there for them in ways that technology and, self-service notes can't, while also making sure that the resources they need are readily available, at a moment's notice. And so we've definitely seen an uptick in focus on making sure that policies and resources are more centralized and easier to find for employees, and making that more readily available, while also making sure that employees know that, the HR team is there for them if they need something that, resources can't take care of.
So when we've talked to HR teams in the past, they've always tried to do the reach out. They've always tried to be the people who are the glue connecting the organization together. What's changed? Why is this happening now? Is it just because of the economy?
The catalyst, I think, was definitely the economy. Whenever there's a moment of uncertainty, that's when employees or people in general, just human beings, need more support, and they want to make sure that they are safe. And I think that human resources often plays the part of helping employees through those more difficult moments. I think that we are seeing that the economy currently being the catalyst for those conversations and making sure that that support is still available. And I think this is also a moment where, HR teams can often shine in a way that, a lot of people go into HR because they really care about employees, because they care about people. They want to be able to support them in their careers. They enjoy connecting with employees. And so I think this is kind of in a moment that has allowed a lot of HR folks to rise to the occasion and really kind of solidify that connection with employees.
The other thing that I think about with this is that so often in the past, there's almost been a barrier between HR and employees, this barrier where managers are the ones who are doing that and interfacing with the employee, caring for the employee, looking for ways to engage the employee. And I don't want to say HR has been shut out, because that it sounds very negative. I think it's been unintentional, but it does seem like more and more we're seeing some of that come down, where managers are saying, hey, HR, you know better how to do this than what I do. How can you help us? How can you help us get there?
Definitely. HR for a lot of managers represents kind of the internal infrastructure of the company. So they're the ones that are, distributing those resources for employees and have that kind of direct line between those teams and other internal teams. And so I think in these moments, this is really a time where HR can support in those additional ways that managers might not be equipped to.
Well, a lot of times managers turn to the HR team to deal with those hairy issues because they just don't have the answers.
Exactly.
And sometimes I blame HR for that, though, because HR likes to hold on to those things. And instead of empowering a manager to understand what the right things are to say, and managers, as you saying before, managers cede some of that because they're not equipped for it. They don't want to. So they pass those batons off to HR. But, HR folks, I love you, but sometimes we need to empower the managers to have these difficult conversations or important conversations. And yes, we're always going to be necessary. Robots are not going to take HR jobs anytime soon. But it would be nice to at least make that balance a little bit more rich.
Definitely. I mean, there's a reason it's called human resources. You need both. You need the resources, but you also need the human.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking subscribe. This podcast is made possible by Salary.com. Now, back to the show.
So let's transition to question 2. You've worked with HR folks really closely, and we love to talk about hacks. What hacks do you see them using to utilize their budget the best way they possibly can?
Yeah, so I think we are really seeing this shift, even just in the general network and kind of community of taking stock of where they're spending right now. I think a lot of companies have been really flush for the last, 5 even plus years, and really just spending kind of where they see the need in the moment. And now we're seeing teams really looking at where they're spending their budget and potentially redistributing it into places that are a little bit more strategic. So like we were just mentioning on self-service. So if there is a more centralized way to distribute resources to employees, that saves a lot of time for employees and managers and for HR and kind of answering the same questions over and over. And it allows both sides of, both managers and teams and HR to spend that time more effectively in more strategic ways. And so we're definitely seeing the budget just being reallocated in a little bit more of a strategic way to make sure that HR is not spending time, in ways that might not be necessary.
And that's the reason why I brought up ESS, because if HR has to become form fillers, it's a killer. It's absolutely a killer. And a lot of the HRISs have good transaction management built in with workflow and everything. So listen, Sophie, when I grew up, we were passing manila envelopes between departments, and there was this, and they were really safe. They had this thread that actually
stringy thing.
Yeah, the string, the red string. God forbid the red string wasn't attached when you got a memo in interoffice mail. Interoffice mail. Yeah, there's a term for 2023. Then, that transition to being a form on a computer, and the form really did the exact same thing it did when it was paper. It was passed from department to department, typically via some kind of email-ish. In the old days, it was Lotus Notes. And now all those things are part of an HRIT, and they're all automated with rules and everything, and conditional workflow built in as well. So that gets HR out of that administrivia, and it really does save a ton of money with HR not having to focus on the more routine, easy to approve workflows, but it gets them into the more difficult discussions and the more problematic issues. So it really makes them more strategic. And I guess one of the questions I'll be asking now is that kind of so we talking about hacks. What are the things that HR can do with the tools that they already have that are sitting around them, like Slack, like Teams? How do they use those in better ways?
Yeah, I think to go back to the thread of self-service, because I think that's such a key piece of this conversation, making sure that resources are not scattered in different places is, again, one of those kind of killers, one of those time killers for HR, where you have, your dental health policies over here, you have your, leave policies in another place. And even for places like, some resource portals where you put in dental benefits and then 15 different resources come up and you're having to kind of manually sort through which one would be relevant for you and your location and your role. I think those are ways where HR can fall into the trap of spending a lot of time creating these resource portals and then employees not using them because it's just too cumbersome. And so then they reach out on Slack and email and say, hey, I just need dental benefits that are relevant for me. Can you just give it to me? And that is an unfortunate situation because HR has then spent a lot of time creating these policies in the hope that employees would be able to use self-serve, but then it's just not very productive for employees, or it's not easy for them to find. And so I think for us, and this is kind of where our software comes in, but more generally, we're seeing HR just wanting to make sure that their employees are able to find those resources in moments where it's most relevant to them, and being able to make it really customized for the employee. If you're a person in California and you're a full-time employee, what relevant resources are you looking for in that moment? And so I think that's really, really key.
Being able to find what you need in the moment you need it and not getting frustrated and not having to make that call, everybody would sign up for that.
I wish my bank would do that.
Yeah.
There's that user friendliness aspect of things that really it's amazing how much that interrupts the information flow and keeps people from being able to monopolize on their benefits if they have. So the more streamlined you can get it, the better.
It's funny you say that, Dwight, because what we have seen is that employees have had so much poor experiences getting automatic responses or having to navigate knowledge base portals beyond their companies, of trying to find that when they're, working with their bank or working with, a shopping portal. It almost never works. And so when employees, even if they are told that, you need to go to this portal to find this information, they almost write it off immediately in their minds because they're like, it's never worked before in my life, work or otherwise. Why should it work now? And so I think it's really important to kind of make sure that that you communicate to employees that you've taken that into account and that their kind of individual circumstances were built into that portal. And it is going to be easier for them to find that information because a lot of employees have just written off those knowledge bases kind of in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much information in there. So if you're sent to a portal, what you immediately envision is, all right, I'm going to have to go through reams and reams of topics and see if I can find what I'm looking for. Or the other one that I see and never use is the chat bots for support, where you type in a question and say, I want to see my dental benefits, and you get some crazy answer back from the thing. Now maybe ChatGPT is going to change that, but that interface, like you say, people just start to write it off, and it doesn't become a viable option for them to use. So you got to be able to optimize that. You got to be able to streamline it.
Dwight, to that point, the one thing I'd say about ChatGPT is if you've used it, and I've used it a few times, it trains you on how to interact with AI more effectively. Because you can ask a question and it will provide an answer. Mm-hmm. And then the more sophisticated you get with being able to ask the question in the right way, you will be able to get back a better answer. And the same thing is true of the other AI components that we utilize every day. Some of them are very simple and don't have the capability for complex queries. Some do. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that we're so trained in being able to ask a person a question and thinking they'll understand the context enough to give us the right answer, that we assume AI will be the same. It's not true. The AI is only going to give you the answer if you've been trained to ask it the right way. In the same way, Dwight, I don't know, I know you remember this. When we learned DOS for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
We just couldn't type in anything. We had to type in the command language the way it was supposed to be. So we were trained on how to enter it the right way, and it gave us back the result we were looking for. In the same way, and I'm getting a little bit back to full circle here, we've been trained to ask HR and managers for things in a certain way because they understand our context. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's an HR person who sits on the other side of the world. And we have to ask them and have compassion for them not understanding our situation, even if it might be an emergency situation. We have to go through the way in which we understand how to explain our situation to be able to get the right answer back. So AI is definitely a tool that we might be able to use in the future. The problem is that we as consumers of that technology need to get better at it. And in the same way, even when we ask our manager or HR internally for a question, for help or finding resources, we need to be able to ask it the right way.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, because there's a totally different way of interacting with things. It's like me speaking with somebody who speaks a different language than I do, that if I ask them a question, I'm going to get gobbledygook back. But if I understand how to ask that question in their language, I'm going to get a totally different experience from that.
Let me give you an analog, Dwight, that as consultants, we have to deal with every day. When we're trying to explain compensation matters or HR matters to non-compensation, non-HR people, we don't talk about sometimes we talk about the same vernacular, right? But when we're talking internally, we talk about comp ratios, we talk about midpoint progressions, we talk about spreads, we talk about a lot of things. And, if we had talked that way to a client, they'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
The deer in the headlights.
Efficacy,
yeah.
what the hell does that mean?
Exactly.
But when you start explaining it to someone who's not in HR, or who, like, I was speaking to a board yesterday, and we had to explain to them about sampling, and we had to explain to them about how surveys work, compensation market surveys. And so you need to be able to come to the person who's the consumer of the advice, the consumer of the information, and sit with them at their level and be able to talk to them in their own language. So it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's funny, Dave, because you mentioned earlier that HR filling out forms can be such a killer of time. And what we've seen is actually, if you can flip the script and have employees fill out a type of form for specific questions, it can help streamline the process so much better. So when we onboard with a new customer and we integrate with Slack and Teams and those kind of portals where employees are really just used to reaching out, asking the question, getting an answer, they are often not asking in the best way. If, just to be in the politest way, it's not the easiest way to understand what the employee wants. And so we really encourage HR to create these forms for, okay, if you're asking about, parental leave, or you're asking about dental benefits, or whatever topic it is, what information do you need from the employee right off the bat in order to move this query fast and getting this closed out? And making sure that employees have to fill out those quick data points is just so much easier on both sides. So the employee gets their answer much faster. HR isn't having to follow up with a bunch of different questions. And you're even making sure that it's getting to the right person right away because they understand more context.
Yeah. Sophie, question about that. So, let's just take FMLA for an example. When an employee is asking for parental leave, they don't really know that it's a qualified FMLA, right? And so they won't have that context in their mind about what are the right things to say, what are the right things to know, what's the context that is important. They may not have put in for the spouse being pregnant. They may not have said, this is coming up. They may not even have informed their manager because it slipped their mind because there are so many things going on in their life. So how do you prompt, what do you have to do to make sure that employee understands everything they need to have to come to the table to be able to complete that form in that manner? Or is it an iterative process where you're doing context searching within the language the employee is using to be able to ferret out the right questions to ask so that you can make sure that they're getting the right data, or that the company's getting the right data?
Yeah, so it's kind of a mixture. So right off the bat, we know that there's some things that we need to ask the employee for those specific forms. So the HR team creates the questions based on the topic. So the employee chooses the topic. They're going to ask about parental leave. We then can cross-reference it with their location data, their department data. So then we can understand, okay, for this specific, region, for this employment type, these are the questions that we're going to ask, and then getting that information from the employee in the moment.
So context it comes from what the employee is selecting at that moment in time.
Selecting in that moment of time, and then the HRIS data as well. So being able to cross-reference that. So making sure that all of the available data about the employee and the current policies, region, all of that stuff is cross-referenced and basically put together to make sure that question is answered as soon as possible.
And then we have to pray that all the data is accurate.
Pray that it's accurate, and if it's not, make sure that is identified right away and kind of flagged. You come up with this huge breadth of knowledge and information, and things change, policies change, and so I think that's another thing, is just making sure that you have a system in place to identify if there's outdated information and updating that.
Every moment of every day, the world of HR moves and the data gets old. And we kind of put it on HR and the employees to fix it. But without that ESS and without them going in or needing to go in to see what might be wrong, it will be wrong, unfortunately. And we need to do the best we can to kind of gently push them to not only expose any changes, but expose any errors. So we're not making assumptions based on what's there. We're making assumptions based on what is correct. So unfortunately, since the first episode of HR Data Labs, we've been talking about the struggles that we have with bad HR data. And that will always be the case. Hey, are you listening to this and thinking to yourself, man, I wish I could talk to David about this? Well, you're in luck. We have a special offer for listeners of the HR Data Labs podcast, a free half-hour call with me about any of the topics we cover on the podcast or whatever is on your mind. Go to salary.com/HRDL consulting to schedule your free 30-minute call today. So, Sophie, what are some hacks you would suggest that companies can do to do more with less? What are the things, if you can put like 3 or 4 different examples that people can take away from this episode and say, I can implement that today, what would you suggest they do?
To stay in the vein of what we're chatting about and the importance of self-service, I would say paring down where your data is. So if you have your data in a bunch of different places, you have it for, different regions or different topics, I think the first thing that you can do is putting it into one place, or at least having a kind of consolidation of the linking out to those different areas. I think that's one of the most confusing parts of kind of resource finding for employees and for HR folks as well. And it's the easiest one to do, to get started on right away. And I would say having a way to also collect the questions from employees. I would say that one of the most, what is that saying? The tale is as old as time. Situations in HR is that employees reach out to the HR BP that they onboarded them. And so they have, 1 or 2 HR people that they know, they're comfortable with, they're go to for all of their questions. And that is really exhausting for the HR manager in question, because they are then having to triage all of those questions of, they're not an expert in everything. So they're having to find the person on their team to answer it. And then they're being the go-between. I think another way to free up their time and make sure that, the question is getting to the right person. And of course, it depends on how big the company is, but having ways to triage that information more easily, whether it's a Google group for Gmail, whether it's a Slack channel, or whether it's software that kind of triages it as well, making sure that it doesn't fall on the shoulders of just a few different HR BPs that employees just happen to know. That is another kind of low-hanging fruit, but really significant piece.
Now, you're talking about, let me go back to the earliest points you're making. One of the things you were talking about is having the fewer channels, like having an HR portal and a company portal and having a benefits portal and having a compensation portal, having everything kind of where all the answers, all the questions, all of the FAQs, all of the knowledge bases is consolidated into one place, correct?
Yes.
Let me ask a follow-up to that question then. In the era of transparency, where pay transparency is becoming not just vogue, which it should have been a long time ago, but becoming the law, are you suggesting as well that that becomes the kind of the conduit for employees to know where to go to find out this information about how is pay made, how are pay decisions made, and where do I go to find grade ranges and all that other stuff, important stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you should be able to go to the same place to get answers on, pay transparency as it is for parental leave, as it is for, visa questions. I think there shouldn't be totally different ways to get that information. And I think that it should also be, just available to employees in the moment. Because, sometimes you have these questions on our Friday afternoon or an evening or a weekend, and you want to be able to get that information right away.
And going back to Dwight's point before, there needs to be the indexing done so that when someone searches, and whether it's a chatbot or whatever, Dwight, when they put in parental leave or they put in my pay or something, that the relevant resources come back and are indexed accordingly, whether it's a smart search, whether it's a, whatever kind of logic is being used. nothing frustrates the crap out of people more than typing in a million different words, try and get the same thing and nothing coming back. Like you have to really build a strong metadata library around those things to be able to take all the different permutations of what people are trying to achieve into those things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you gotta have that, because people just won't use it. Won't use the technology for it.
I think those are also the strategic technologies that, or systems that is worth investing in, where if you can nail that triaging, if you can nail that communication of information, you've, saved so much time for your HR team, and they can focus on so many other things. And I think redistribution of budget into those more strategically focused areas is something that I think we're going to see a lot more of.
The funny part is I've been building blogs forever, Turetsky.com or HRDataLabs.com, whether it's a WordPress site or whatever. And it's so easy on those sites to make things searchable, whether it's through meta tags or just categories. And I look back at the years that I was trying to build HR portals that had all that data and information. I'm thinking, wow, it'd be so easy today to create a WordPress site where you could literally use postings to post about, the 2023 merit increase process or, the 2023 grade ranges, and have people be able to find it in no time. Technology has really come around to making it so much simpler than the complications we used to build, over-engineer in the past.
Yeah, and we're in an exponential growth phase in terms of our capability and speed, and continuing to build that kind of stuff out.
Let's just not overcomplicate it, Dwight.
Why not? Come on. Got to keep life interesting.
Oh, absolutely. And then we have podcasts to explain it all back.
Yeah, exactly.
Simple again. So, Sophie, any other hacks, tips, tricks that you wanted to mention?
I think we covered, the main areas, especially on the self-service side. I think making sure that there's just less burden on the individual HR managers and on the employee and managers that are looking for information. There's a lot of the same goals on both sides of the coin. People want to be able to get the information fast. HR BPs and managers don't want to have to, be the kind of conduit for every single piece of information. At the end of the day, if you can also really streamline that type of process, you're going to save time for employees. You're actually going to get them to be more productive, because they're not going to end up spending time figuring out how to identify, what the next step is for their promotion or for moving around or, anything like that. So it really just kind of makes your entire internal system in your company work a lot smoother.
And because they found where they could get promoted to and what skills they need, and they did that without contacting HR and their manager, now they have information that they can use to acquire those skills, get promoted, and not have to look elsewhere.
Yeah, or, if they are reaching out, because HR managers are there to support employees in those moments. I think that employees can just use the time of HR better when they have all of the basic information already. If they know exactly the skills and the next steps that they are interested in, being able to then reach out to your HR manager and talk about the things that, of course, aren't going to be available on a form, because it's about your journey as an employee. Those are the conversations that HR is there for, that they are excited to take part in. And I think just being able to utilize their time for those conversations is where HR just is able to be super efficient and really shine.
Sophie, thank you very much. This was awesome. We really appreciate your insight.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And Dwight, thank you.
Thank you, David.
And thank you all for listening. Take care and stay safe.
That was the HR Data Labs podcast. If you liked the episode, please subscribe. And if you know anyone that might like to hear it, please send it their way. Thank you for joining us this week, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.